The galaxy burns. The heretic falls. And the Emperor protects. Welcome, Imperial citizens, to The Emperor Protects. My name is Doug with 2+ Stuff, along with my co-host, Dan with Cubic Shenanigans. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, my friend. It's great to be back talking about some heresy.
Yes, we've had a lot of travel, both of us individually, so we've been dodging each other quite a bit, but are finally settled down to talk about Titandeath, one of the cooler books in, I think, in the Horus Heresy series. There we go. Because we wanted to take a break from the Legions, see something new, something different. I think the last time we did was Mechanicus or Mechanicum, I think.
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
So it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And so this is by Guy Haley, and it's a book that obviously has to do a lot with Imperial Titans, Imperial Knights, Knight Houses, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to be talking about it. Also has to do with, oh my gosh, Beta Garmon is the name of the system. I don't know why it never sticks in my head. But,
okay, sure.
But if you don't know, Beta Garmon is it's basically the doorstep to Terra. And we've talked about it a lot recently.
Yes.
Dan and I have been going through the books. What is it? Slaves to Darkness happens immediately after this.
Yes.
So this is our prequel to the last book we did, but it's a very different story, so it doesn't feel like a prequel. It's just an event happens at the end. And with that, it's just the story of Horus launching his final spear tip attack for Terra and all the heroes bracing for what's about to happen.
Yep.
So I'll open it up here. Dan, why don't you take us away? Tell us about Titandeath, my friend.
Well, this book is about Titans, more Titans, bigger Titans, but it kind of feels like an engine misfiring. We talked about it in that it makes some progress, some things happen, and then it kind of segues, or you have a memory episode, and then it goes forward again, and the story moves, and then it kind of slows. So it feels like that kind of stop and go, which I think makes it seem longer in some cases.
Yes.
Plus, he has some. If you're listening, it's a very interesting chapter, for example, where he talks. The entire chapter is about how you start up a Titan. Okay. But anyway, it is about Titans, and that's what's cool. I mean, it's about a very unique Titan Legio that we're going to talk about, Solaria. There's something that makes them very special. There's a surprise weapon that I don't remember having been used before in Heresy, which is really cool. Of course, it's the new, quote, new or dark Mechanicum that uses it.
Absolutely.
There's this incredibly hateful rivalry that's going on, which is really cool. Amazing Titan battle scenes, lots of volcano cannons. And so the story really, though, centers around the Legio Solaria, also known as the Imperial Hunters, and we'll find out why they're called that.
Awesome. I think it's a great synopsis and introduction. I think this is a wonderful book. Like the book Mechanicum showed us what the Horus Heresy meant for that very specific arm of the Imperium. And I feel like this is the same thing. There's no Astartes, really. I mean, there's a few shout-outs here and there. We'll get to those. Oh, yeah. But like for the most, it's not a Space Marine story. This is a human story, and it's about the Titan Legions, and it gives us that same introduction to like there are good guys, bad guys, and lots of hard choices that both of them have to make. And you starts reasonable and things snowball real bad, and all of a sudden it doesn't seem very reasonable at the end.
No.
Which we've talked about, like, I vote for Horus on his side of the heresy, and then all of a sudden people have like a third arm or a spike coming out of their head, and you're like, how did we get here?
It's funny that you say that, because we're going to be commenting on a very popular Primarch who has some real interesting thoughts about the Emperor and this whole endeavor.
Absolutely, I loved it.
So I guess, it almost seems like this is happening a lot when we're reading these books, but Malkador is meeting with somebody. This is the beginning of the book. And in this case, it's on Terra, and he's meeting with Dorn on board the Phalanx, his huge battleship. And they're talking about the inevitability of Horus coming to Terra, that it just can't be stopped.
Yes.
So they, to your point earlier, they talk about how important Beta Garmon is as a gateway, kind of a confluence of stable warp routes, and how the War Master and the Loyalists are just pouring forces into these. And so Dorn, it's kind of like this inevitability that all they can do is buy time.
Yes.
And hopefully enough that they can get the Ultramarines to make it to Terra. At least during the siege, they'll be there. He notes how many Titan Legios there are. There's like dozens and dozens in the system, like thousands of it. You can't even picture like thousands of Titans. This a whole new concept, right, for Heresy. But there literally are thousands of Titans running around the Beta Garmon system doing different things. And he talks about how devastating it's going to be. Interestingly enough, as hopeless as this is, it's kind of a forlorn hope. He's ordered Dorn and Jagatai Khan to do whatever they can to delay Horus.
Which I think are two. I mean, obviously, those are the two Primarchs available at the moment to do this. But at the same time, they're very interesting characters. We don't focus like on the minutia of what they do in this book.
Yes.
But if I had to put someone as like a harassing, just slow them down, Jagatai Khan is on my list. Like he's the top ranked. He's with Alfarius of like just go be a pain in the butt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, perfect choices. And again, as you noted, this book is the quote prequel to Slaves of Darkness, and it is the sequel to Wolvesbane, which is the story of Leman Russ making a cut the head from the serpent kind of a surprise attack on Horus on the Vengeful Spirit.
Yes.
Which did or maybe didn't work out. We're not quite sure. We'll find out. We do know that during that, though, the War Master was very severely wounded by the sword that Leman Russ, or the spear that Leman Russ had, and it was pretty bad. I mean, he was not in good shape. So
that's how Slaves to Darkness started. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, they were dragging him into the throne room because he was in bad shape. So the story begins here with a young woman named Mohana Vai. And what she's doing is she's actually, when she's doing this, she's not such a young woman. She's like 150 years old now. She is known as the Great Mother in the Legio Solaria. She is the oldest Princeps. She's like the Princeps Primus of the entire Legio.
Yes.
And she is recalling her origin story to a bunch of new recruits. So she's actually in this amniotic life support tank in the head of her Titan. But so she's recalling this day many, many years ago that she was on her home world of Procon, and she talks about, first of all, she kind of goes around the story and talks about how when the Mechanicum came and when the Imperium came to her planet, they said to her, the whole imperial truth, there are no gods. And then the Mechanicum came and they told her about their deity.
Except this one.
Wait a minute. You guys just told me there are no gods. You guys told me you have a god. She's just like, this is bizarre, and it creates a lot of cynicism, and it's not faith, it's cynicism, But either way, she made sure that she and the other huntresses didn't forget. They have a goddess of the hunt kind of a thing, kind of like the Greeks did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've worshipped this goddess for millennium. And so the women in this society are hunters. So this is where we end up getting the title for Legio Solaria, the Imperial Hunters, came from their original function within their society.
Yes.
So on one day, she was on a steed, like a hunting steed, which is a real horse, real flesh and blood horse, not some mechanical weird thing.
Not since Lionel Johnson.
Yeah, sure. And she was on a hill, and she was kind of overlooking the final stretch of something called The Chase. She's joined by another young woman, and they're not really friends, but they're both looking over what's going on. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this group of knights appears. And you're going, knights, that's cool. No. This is more like steampunk knights is what this is. If you can think War Machine, probably, if you think of those models, this is much more similar to those than it is to the modern knights that we know in 40K. They were powered by steam and alcohol, and they were trying to grab this really large cog that was on the ground, and they were going to run it through an arch that was waiting at the end of this kind of track that they were on. And so Mahana's brother had grabbed the cog. He was almost to the finish line, but he got smashed into by another knight. And all of a sudden, she just reacted on instinct, and she charged her horse down into the middle of this melee of all these huge metal knights crashing into each other and smashing and stuff. And she grabbed the cog.
Yep.
And everybody was just screaming. They just like, what the? Her father and all the other nobles were just incensed. But she was just driven that her family had to win this, because if the winner of this, whoever took the cog through the arch, got special favors from the Mechanicum. They got technology and those kind of things. There's one problem. Men were not allowed to participate in the hunt in Procon society. So she has broken like the cardinal rule.
Oh,
of
you mean
culture.
women are not allowed to participate?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, women are not allowed. Women are not allowed. Only men. So her father's the king, and his daughter is the one who's breaking this cardinal rule of their culture. And she goes to the arch, and of course the court, all the other barons and everybody else, they were like, no, this is not valid. And all of a sudden the Abmech guys stood up, because this is the Adeptus Mechanicus now. There is such a thing in the Heresy. And they said, wait a minute, she won. They were looking like, well, they can't.
Because the Mechanicus plays rules as written, and she's the one who put the cog in the hole.
Exactly, yeah. Right? And just as that part of the story is done, she comes back to reality. And there's
pause there for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, I was trying to explain that scene to my wife, and essentially I boiled down to this young woman interrupted men's only intramural capture the flag tournaments that were all like techno barbarians, because these guys were lost from the Mechanicum but still had knights and regressed back to steam and alcohol technology. And so it's this weird, when they use that term techno barbarian, they had a whole knight system and culture, but they didn't have the tech and the support. And so when the Mechanicus came, they were like, whoever wins the intramural capture the flag game is going to be in a very important part of this next district of the Mechanicum, and they were all fighting for a chance to be a part of that.
That's a great analogy. Absolutely.
And so the girl comes in on the field, takes the cog, puts it in, and all of a sudden everyone's like, that can't happen. And like every 2000s, story where like she's got that or whatever, just comes in, crushes the competition, and everyone's like, it's fair.
Yeah, which was just hilarious.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's awesome. It's an Amanda Bynes movie if there ever was.
Everybody just backs off.
Yep.
We'll tell you how this works.
So yes. Anyway, please continue.
No, that's fine. So when we come back to the present, the Great Mother again is in her amniotic tank, and the head of her, it's like, I think, an Imperatus, the super large Titans that have like the little city on the back on the top of their heads. And it's called Luxor on Victoria. That is hers. And then a bunch of princeps have come, and they're all, quote, her daughters. Now, there's only one that is biologically her daughter, and this is Escher Mahana in Domini Ex Venare, and she's really important to the story. The story kind of centers around Escher. But there are other princeps as well.
Yep.
Escher's friend Jahani, and there are others. And again, they've all come to make homage to the Great Mother because there's a tech priest that kind of called them together. He's Vox Omni Machina. That's his name. So I'll just throw a few names out there here. So the major development in this part of the story is that the Legio Solaria has had their orders changed. They were originally headed for Beta Garmon, like 3 or 2, I can't remember which one. Now they're headed for Theta Garmon, which is the site of this huge AdMech facility. If you kind of think of like the belt of steel around Mars, it's kind of like that, but not quite. But it's huge. All right. And so he explains that the Mechanicum and the orders that they have actually come from Lord Dorn.
Right.
He wants them to go and try to salvage this. This thing because they're questioning it, like, where did the orders come from? Well, first of all, Zagreus Kane, who is now the true, quote, fabricator general of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and Lord Dorn. And, of course, Escher gets kind of indignant, and Vox Omni Machina, he's like, hey, girl, settle down.
Yep.
Gratitude borders on an insubordination, and we're not going to have any of that.
Yeah. No matter how important you think you are, I promise this comes from a higher office.
Yeah, he kind of put her in her place. That
Yes.
was pretty interesting, and she listened to this guy because he's a senior tech priest. So now, so the next part of it is the Great Mother awakens, and she's ready to have the head placed back onto Luxor on Victoria because the head is kind of stored separately. Is what happens, and she's going through with the cogitators and stuff. They think that she's like 140, 150 years old. This is just one of the scenes in the book that kind of goes on in excruciating detail of how this whole thing happens. And the Great Mother gives a briefing to all of her daughters.
Mm-hmm.
She explains the situation. That says, again, we're going to try to take back these AdMech facilities. There are other Titan legions that are there. There are other Imperial forces like the Imperial fleet. And they're kind of going to fight on their own, though, because the Legio Solar is a light, if there is such a thing, a light Titan legion. They're very, very focused on Warhound Titans.
Yeah, not
a lot of
protracted
Warhounds.
battles. Yep.
Very few Imperators, very few Reavers, but just gobs of Warhounds. Now, It's interesting because they talk about how many. And again, these numbers are just makes your head blow up. So Legio Furians, who's there, have almost 100 engines. Solaria's got like 80 engines. There's 24 more that's like 200 Titans. 200. Think about that. For one battle, 200 Titans. You're just going, what?
That's a heck of a Forge World Order.
That is, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. That's somebody's life savings. And the most important bit of information that she shares, though, is that they're going to be facing something called Legio Vulpa, who were known as the Death Stalkers, and they're fighting for the traitors. And there's a princeps named Hatek, who is another very important character who's known very personally, and we're going to find out why, to Escher. And Escher starts getting really, really angry again, and her friend Jahani kind of grabs her arm and says, "Legio first. Got to remember, Legio first," because something happened between them. So we're ready. Ready to go.
I'd say that was a fantastic synopsis of a lot of exposition and conversation. Like, because it really was. It was like pulling teeth. Like, what's the mission? Who are the players? What is the story? So, good job, Dan.
Oh, thanks, man. Thank you. Yeah, that was like 7 or 8 chapters worth of stuff.
It was, and as much as I appreciated a lot of it, like, just the scene where, like, the Great Mother was just explaining, this is what we're going to do. Was really good. And one thing to add on here is the traitor forces attacking Beta Garmon, that whole system, are very unified. They have a very sharp chain of command because Horus is just about there, right? Whereas the loyalists are very divided because no one can agree on who should be in charge. The Primarchs are not there yet. And so everyone is fractured. And so you said that they're fighting on their own. It's because they're just trying to pick fights that they think that they can win, right? Like,
Yes.
I can't be under anyone else. I can't give my Titans to somebody else's command, but I can secure this. And so it's kind of what everyone just kind of takes their own little slice of the pie.
That's a really good point. Because then that's one of the reasons that the traitors are winning, is because they can focus their fire, as
Yes.
it were, while the loyalists are very divided. That's excellent. Yes. And they do talk about that several times in the book. Even Sanguinius and Jagatai are like, well, this is a mess. Once they get there, they're going, oh God, this is bad.
Yes, I have thoughts on that conversation in a little bit.
So the next scene is pretty awesome, because these huge, I mean, these things are bigger than like a Space Marine battle barge. They're these transports that literally hold hundreds of Titans. And they have these crenellated walls that are built on the sides of this machine, these huge transports. And these crenellated walls are manned by a bunch of knights, like real knights, you know, the 40K kind of knights. And so what's interesting about that to me, that when we first talked about it, was you have all these knights, and these aren't the steampunk ones. These are real knights.
Yes.
And it's called House Procon Vi. That's what this is. All knights, but they're all guys. And so it was just kind of weird, because they're stressing the fact that, you know, Legio Solaria is the Princeps, the Moderati, everybody, all the crews of their Titans are female. Mm-hmm. But there's this one element within the Legio, House Procon Vi, that's guys manning the little knights, which is interesting. We'll find out how that ended up happening. Yes. But all good. So this is the other thing. There is the, quote, dark Mechanicum. We're going to call them the new Mechanicum now, because that's what they want to be called. Mm-hmm. This attack is just the most amazing description of stuff. Like, some of these attacking ships get by, and what they do is they come out and then they try to dump scrap code into the machine, you know, into the transport by penetrating the hull, or they try to dump nanites into the vessel and get into the systems. But it's like Mechanicum versus AdMech, and it was just brilliant. Like, mm-hmm. They describe how the AdMech counter this, because they have their own little guys literally that are vacuuming up the nanites.
Yes. Yep.
It was hilarious. I'm just picturing what that must have looked like, but it was such a great description.
Well, and I love it because it's just more depictions of what good and evil, like the clash between good and evil, looks like.
Yes.
For these very weird people who are all about techno stuff. Like, it's code, and it's like bots.
Yeah, zeros and ones.
Misinformation, and it's just scattering the radar. It's just crazy. It's all info war.
It's so cool description. So, but even though there are like hundreds of knights, they couldn't stop these wave after waves of enemy attacks. So some of the new Mechanicum broke through the hull, and they went for the Titans that were inside. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a mistake, because not only were the Titans just about ready to be dropped from their other ships, but there were inside the Titan Bay like thousands of AdMech troops that had been like waiting in stasis. So as these enemy troops are coming in, these guys just kind of wake up.
Yep.
And they're just fighting back. And just as this is going on, the Titans are like, see ya, poosh, they just get shot out of the ship. And like, too late, suckers.
Yep.
They go. And they made it, which was cool.
It is cool, but it also means there's no resupply.
Yes.
They just got dropped.
Yep, they're gone. And then now we move to the antagonist of the story. We move on to the Legio Volpa, and there's a warlord Titan. So this is kind of between the Reavers and those big Imperators.
Yep.
And this one is named Nuncio Dolores, and it's the machine of Princeps Hatek, who's the main antagonist in this story. So they're deployed on Iridium, which is, the way I see this, is the name of the moon where this big facility is. Mm-hmm. So the Legio Volpo is kind of defending this from Legio Solaria and Furians and some others. So Nuncio Dolores has a primary weapon, which is not just a volcano cannon, it's an upgraded volcano cannon. Because Hatek only settles for the best. And the other hand is like a power gauntlet. So he actually prefers to get in close, which is hilarious. And this is actually a little bit of foreshadowing that he loves melee. He loves to get in there and just smash his opponents. And you're going, okay, fine. But there's something about that that's a little that fits into later parts of the story.
Yes.
So there is, again, another cool Titan battle. This one is amazing. And this is not knights, it's Titans. So the 18th Mandible, which is part of Hatek's force, they decide they're going to range ahead and ambush the Legio Solaria, which was a mistake. Because you're trying to ambush the ambushers, which is not very smart. So Solaria saw him coming. They caught him out. And even though they're lighter, they're much faster. And again, this is Escher's second Mandible. And so they're about to finish off the 18th. I mean, they're getting in there. The Warhounds are going in and destroying stuff, and Titans are falling all over the place. And just, again, a great description of a Titan battle. And all of a sudden, Hatek and his 7th Mandible arrive. And right away, Escher recognizes Nuncio Dolores, and she knows who's inside that thing. Unfortunately, Hatek's Mandible is much more heavily armed. And Escher was like forced to withdraw. She didn't want to. She wanted to face off against this guy. Yep. But yeah, that was a good thing because this wouldn't have worked out for her. And yeah, so I mean, there is that battle, and it's very cool. And there's this face-to-face confrontation between them. She ends up having to withdraw her Manipul.
Yes.
And then they end that part of the story with Hatek coming back to Legio Volpos, like their camp where their Titans are. And he's realizing that he is having a more and more difficult time detaching from his Titan. He gets, severe migraines, all kinds of stuff is going on because, and you understand when you're in this thing, you're so, I don't know what the term would be. You're so connected. You're so enhanced. Like once you're part of the Titan, you pull somebody out of that and they just feel empty.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing there. But he has noticed, and the story stresses the fact that he realizes how difficult it is. So
do you want me to take over for a little bit? Get the mirror?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Yeah. So, can you turn the speaker down? I can hear myself.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So one of the things I wanted to point out is like when, just like you had said, like they plug themselves into this machine. And it's the way that I've kind of thought about it. And if you are someone who knows more about, how Titans work in the lore of 40K and 30K, please let me know. But my understanding is you're essentially using the human brain as a part of the computer that makes the system function. So you're kind of plugging yourself in. Your Princeps is the main mind, and then all the people below them are, like, my brain is connected to the weapon system, or my brain's connected to the legs, or whatever, the shields, the reactor, etc. Yeah. And so one of the things they kind of filled in this sequence is like he was very cranky about the fact that if this keeps going on, he's going to end up in the tank like Mahanavi, where you literally degrade so much that you can't disconnect anymore. You've become kind of part of the circuit permanently.
Yep.
And sure enough, like when they're plugged in, they can see all the things that the machine can sense, and all that information is processing through them. And so when they detach, it's like a system shock of like
that. Yeah.
Now you're just a little mortal.
And you did say something real quickly that's really important. Understanding that this is still a time when the Princeps were not in tanks. Like in 40K, Princeps they're in their tanks all the time. That's the only place they ever are.
Really? I didn't know.
But in this time, there are still princeps that are sitting in seats, like thrones inside of there. And they, to your point, once they get so connected that they have to get put into a tank, but that's like a last resort in 30K. So anyway, go ahead, please.
That's interesting. And then our scene kind of pivots to a fun story. I'm going to take us through this, Dan, because I have some zingers.
Great
so essentially, after this battle, we're hanging out with Escher, and this next couple of chapters gives us a lot of the emotional context for the story. Okay.
Yes.
So, So she sits down in her room, and she's sitting at her computer, and she decides to pull up like a historical file and starts reading it. And so we kind of fade in between historical piece and also her memory to get the following story. A long time ago, the Escher and Hecata meet for the first time as Ferrus Manus ordered that the Legios, Solaria, and Vulpa fight side by side.
Yes.
So to get everyone on the same page, they have like a meet and greet, a dinner party. Some of the delegates from Solaria went over to the Vulpa ship, and they had like a meeting or whatever. Within that, Hecata and Escher catch each other's eye. There's some fantastic dialogue between the two of them that kind of highlights their personalities. Like you had mentioned before, Hecata is definitely a run forward and punch it in the face, and Escher's more like, no, we believe in the spirit of the hunt and picking your prey apart and that kind of stuff. Having some great wordplay. And it's at this point that we're introduced to the history and why all of Solaria is female. Through this dialogue, which is to say that weird, completely out of context story about a girl riding a horse through steampunk medieval times in the beginning. That is Mohanavai, the woman who's in the tank 140 years later. When she was taken and declared the winner, the Mechanicus brought her in as promised, elevated her family's house, and made her essentially the first brain computer to be plugged into Luxor Invocata. And, or Victoria, I think it is. I don't remember which one. But it's essentially she was the first one to be plugged in, which is a big honor. But they essentially bought her life for that. Like, she gave up everything. She didn't know that she was going to be like sold into indentured servitude to a machine. But she's also like the queen of that machine, so there's got some pros and cons.
Right?
She, as a person, wanted to experience motherhood, and so had a daughter, Escher, who is the character who's now having dinner with Hecata. And eventually we'll meet Escher's daughter, and so we actually have a multi-generational setup here. The reason this is important is because this little meetup is super sexy. There's a lot of intense eye stares.
Oh yeah.
So intense. And the conversation just kind of fades to black as the camera pans up and sees that they're making out underneath the Titans of Vulpa, I think they were on their ship, I believe.
Yep.
And so it's this like super scandalous thing. Escher becomes pregnant. She was not expecting to be. And so there's a lot of cool internal tension with her and like how that makes her feel isolated within her own Legio of having a natural born kid versus like a clone or something. Or not a clone. They do the thing where like they pull your eggs out and they grow it in a vat. Basically, vat grown humans is what I'm trying to say. And so there's a lot of cool, like I said, emotional. This is the emotional tension to me of the book, is this series, but it is awkward because it is the closest thing that GW comes to a sex scene, and my wife is a romance author, and it is like someone hit the e-brake at the hardest point in the turn.
Well,
we can't talk about it.
You talked about how, that her being hooked into her Titan, she was the first one. The thing that I thought was hilarious the way he wrote this is that her father, once she did what she did, they realized that the Mechanicum was there for like a tribute as well. And they wanted 150 bodies. Yep. Is the number they used. They didn't care which 150 they gave them. So her father thought he was clever.
Yes.
And he was like, I have my daughter and a bunch of other young women who are troublemakers. I'm going to give them to the Mechanicum. The Mechanic was like, we don't care. So they literally, they formed Legio Solaria from those original 150 women. And I thought it was great when he talked about how they ended up coming back to Procon. They all came back in their Titans, and everybody else, including the Knights and their little steampunks, were going, oh, crap. We really screwed up. Her dad realized, but it was too late by then.
Oh, I love that. There was some sweet, like, she had the perspective to be like, you guys were fighting over table scraps. This is nothing. Exactly. That big drama that decided our entire fate, that was a blip.
Yeah. It was so good.
At the end of our memory sequence, Escher is summoned to go see the Great Mother, meaning her biological mother.
Yes.
And she's accompanied by her daughter, the daughter of her and Hatek we just learned about. And there's this interesting conversation because it shows a weirdly human side to otherwise very cold characters, where the Great Mother just took a moment and was like, I'm going to die soon. And I would just really like there to be a moment where there's 3 generations sitting in a room together. And the other 2 were like, this is deeply uncomfortable. Do we feel things? Like, and it was perfect. You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things, like they both make sense.
Yep.
And this is where it is essentially, I believe this is the point where the Great Mother declares that Escher is going to take over as the Great Mother, should she pass.
The successor,
Yep, of the Legio, and basically gives some of the more details of the battle plan headed to the Beta Garmon system. Horus's forces have retaken the capital city, and basically at this point, she spoils that we're here to stop whatever's going on. We're just going to have to stop it. We're not trying to win. We're just trying to stop it. And so I thought that was a fantastic, I don't know, scene for those 3 characters to all be in.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, it was so human. And you don't get that feeling with Titans at all.
Nowhere else.
And everything else. Yes. 3 generations in one place. That was very cool. So after that scene with the 3 women, we're back to Hatek now, and again he's even suffering more. He's in his cabin detached from Nuncio Dolores, and he's basically drinking himself into unconsciousness because he doesn't do low sticks or drugs or anything. He just alcohol. It's lots of alcohol. And all of a sudden the door opens to his cabin, and this Tech-Magos in black robes comes in, and he is a member of the Dark Mechanicum. He is the new Mechanicum.
You want to start this party, kid?
And this guy, at first you're like, well, okay, he's just a guy. Well, no. He is the first follower of Sotanul, who, if we remember from the other stories, was the emissary of Kelbor Hal, who was the fabricator general who took over Mars, went to Chaos and formed the Dark Mechanicum, the new Mechanicum. So this guy is pretty high up in the organization, as it were. And he's seen a lot of stuff. He knows a lot of things that are going on. He knows the power of combining chaos with the mechanical. And he explains that his goal is to create an all-powerful god machine. He basically wants to meld a god machine with a demon from the warp. And he knows about Hatek and how he suffers. And he said, this is your last chance to finally, kind of be one with the machine. No more MIU connections, nothing like that. And he also talks very briefly about, by the way, we're going to win this battle. We have a special way that we figured out to win this battle. And Hatek's like, what are you talking about, man? They just kicked our butts. And the guy, this guy is just so creepy cool. And he just, Oh my gosh, yeah. Um, it just he's such a cool character because he's so detached and he's so chaotic. You know, he's so yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I
It
like the
just
idea. He felt because he's representing a different faction, the Dark Mechanicum. He did feel like he always had his own little machinations on the side. Like, yeah, he
yes.
was a really fun character to follow.
And another important thing is this is the first time during this conversation that we hear the word corn.
Hmm.
We hear the blood god's name for the first time, which again, it's very um,
We're getting there.
they'll be here. And then the next scene we go to is kind of frightening. There's a
Mhm.
bunch of Imperial soldiers that have been captured, and they're having these implants inserted into their skulls,
Yes.
basically making them like mind slave drones,
Hmm.
and to serve kind of as berserker cannon fodder. And of course, who is overseeing the work? Our friend Protoss that we just met. And he talks about he needs 50,000 of these guys. So they've captured at least 50,000
Hmm.
Imperial troops that they're going to be using because they don't have enough of their own.
Yeah, and that was an
So,
interesting point because even though Horus's forces are unified, they don't. I mean, Beta Garmon is the place to do the staging and the collecting of all your resources. So, like
mhm,
individually, a lot of these forces are pretty rough. Like
mhm.
they don't have manpower or ammunition for some of them. So, like, yeah, to see this whole thing where it's like we got to make our own army. I
Yeah,
got brain
it's
chips and a
crazy.
scalpel. Let's do it.
Oh, it's brutal. And then when we see what happens with
Hmm.
them, um, so now Legio Solaria is now they're defending this hive that has just been decimated. The Great Mother has committed a very large portion of Solaria to
Yep.
assist the guard forces in defense of this area. There's a brief recall scene where Escher and Jahani are in a maternity ward, and basically Jahani has said to Escher, "You need to kill this child," and she's like, "What?" And Jahani's like, "This is Hottek's kid. He's chaos. He's a traitor, and the kid's going to grow up to be the same as him."
Hmm.
And Escher's like not having any of that, right? But it was just an interesting little side part of the
Yep.
story. So she's shocked back into the present. Her demi legio is being ambushed. So a group of void ships has maneuvered past trader void ships, maneuvered past the loyalist fleet, and they start to fire lances down into her maniple.
Hmm.
So they're just starting to wake up. Some of them get caught out, not many, but you find out that these ships are also launching troop carriers.
Yes.
And the attacking force, when they look at their uniforms, they figure out they're from the Fasadian regiments. And they were formerly loyalist guards. Just thousands and thousands and thousands of these troops pouring out. And we know who these guys are now. They're all these brain
Mind
slaves,
slaves. Yeah.
mind slaves, yeah. And the Knights of House Pro. This is another cool battle scene, another neat one, because not only is it Escher and her knights or her Titans, but those knights from House Procon, they run into another group of enemy troops. There are a lot of tanks. It was like a
Hmm.
classic cavalry charge. All these knights, like dozens and dozens of them, just charging into this traitor force. Um, and Dominic X Venari is actually being boarded, and they find out that these guys are these neuroslaves
Yes.
who've been operated on, and the entire attack force is like that. It's just very chaotic. Just an excellent battle scene, but again, you're just kind of diving into the dirt here in
Hmm.
that particular part of the story, but it's still important in terms of what's happening overall.
Oh yeah, and
And
some
then
of
we
the
have this.
systems of the Titan are knocked down pretty hard. Like it. This is the first time the hero has taken personally a real beating.
Yeah, because these guys had like grenades they were throwing into the
Hmm.
command consoles and stuff, and they killed a couple of Moderatis and those kind of things. And you just think, I mean, Escher's there with like a las pistol shooting these guys. You're going, wow,
Hmm.
that's about as up close and personal as you can get. Although it was very cool, she ends up being saved by the tech priest who every Titan has a tech priest who's kind of in charge of the the void shields and the reactor and everything. And so he comes and uses his mechadendrites and just starts ripping these guys up, and that was pretty cool. Like out of nowhere. So now we have this major segue, Doug, in that the Angel and the Khan are here.
Yes.
And this is a conversation. Why don't you talk about this, because you had mentioned it earlier, how that conversation goes between the two of them and how they decide what they're going to do.
Yeah, so essentially, and remember, it's not necessarily their full legions, it's just whatever strength they could muster to get here as soon as possible.
Sure.
And that matters because the events that we talked about with the Blood Angels have just transpired. Sanguinius has just faced his own demons and almost fell to Khorne and become the Blood Angel. Like, everyone's already had a bad day.
And this is on Cygnus Prime, right?
Yep.
Cabanda and the whole thing. Yep.
Yep. So he does make reference to that very briefly. It's just kind of a nod, but he's already been through a lot. And him and the Khan are essentially trying to assess the situation, right? They know that if they come into this, they obviously have command, right? The chain of command issue is now solved. Right. Whatever the Primarchs want, they're going to get. Which is great for the hero side because they do have more resources initially. But as they're trying to come up with the plan, they're talking very candidly about the fact that, like, this is a death march. This is to the death and to the end. And our only job is to just hold them as long as we can. Everyone's got to hold off to see if we can get enough time for Guilliman to escape the warp storm that the Word Bearers did in their book stories. And let them get to Terra. And so, like, it's a last stand. It's everything like that. They have that very candid conversation. There's a lot of great internal tension for Sanguinius because he does have that foresight about his own death. And he keeps, like, dipping into, like, well, I know I'm not going to die here. Horus's ship isn't here, and I know I'm going to die on his ship. So I guess I'm invincible? I don't know how this is. He's like, I don't know how this works, and that plays into something we'll talk about here in a bit. But essentially, he's doing the mental math, and he's like, well, this is the last stand, but I know it's not my last stand, so I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
you know.
Yep.
And so they know they can't win, but they're just trying to bleed Horus's armies to the point where Terra stands a really good chance. After a bit, Sanguinius decides he has enough information for a battle plan, and I put a note here for myself to remind myself. Essentially, what the battle plan is like the two Primarchs are like, okay, we need a direct chain of command with no confusion whatsoever. So Sanguinius is going to take all the responsibility, and then Jagatai Khan, I'm going to go have a great time. And that is exactly how it pans out because they know they know their strengths, and so Sanguinius is like, yes, I will lead the Emperor's armies and I will decide the battle plan or whatever, and I trust your judgment. Where are you going to be, Jagatai? And he's like, wherever things are worst, and he just, like, pieces out.
It is so him.
Which is like,
so him, man.
We all have that coworker who does that to us and we hate them for it, but it was really cool in this specific scene.
It's so great too to see the interaction between these two brothers, between these two loyalists, because they obviously care for each other a great deal and they respect each other, and it's pretty neat to have that happen because it doesn't happen a whole lot in the Heresy. So, all right, so they're here. They've kind of started doing their things. Then we go back to Theta Garmon, which was this weird AdMech facility, and Legio Volpa is now on the offensive back there, trying to take back this things. And there's thousands of loyalist ships that are coming into the system, and Volpa's facing off against Legio Ataris, which are called the Firebrands. Mm-hmm. And there's another great battle, very cool Titan battle. Although, as though there was not enough chaos, this huge debris shower starts, like literally smashing into Titans and blowing out their voids and crushing their heads. And it was just like, what? Out of nowhere. So Ataris, though, used the debris shower to cover a flanking attack. Cool. Nuncio Dolores, of course, Here's Hatek. He charges into another god machine. He almost dies, barely survives, but Nuncio Dolores is very severely damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And around him, he sees that Ataris is getting the upper hand, but he knows he has one last hand to play. So what he does is he orders his entire Demi-Legio, not just his maniple, everybody, to deactivate their sensoriums. And this is like a prearranged thing. There was a timer that was going down, and once the timer went off, boom, you shut everything down. So just as they do, there's this description of this blinding light that appears on the horizon. And the new Mechanicum have actually activated a massive EMP. And I don't know about you, but this is the first time I've ever heard of that kind of weapon being used in the Heresy. And of course, all the Loyalist Titans, they're just incapacitated. All their stuff is gone. The ships, the Loyalist ships that are around are gone. And the Firebrands basically get slaughtered. And that goes for a lot of the ships in the Loyalist fleet. And you're just going, oh my God, that is just crushing.
The way it sounded was almost like, imagine, because their brains are all plugged into the machines, all the people who knew what was coming were unplugged. But it's like everybody else had a stroke at the same time because part of your brain just got shut off. And it's just like the whole army was just in disarray, and the ships are connected to people's heads too. It's just everything. Oh, it was such a devastating scene. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it was brilliant.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You know?
I mean,
just so brilliant.
I'm part of the Chaos guys. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, it's crazy stuff. So after that battle, we go back to Hatek, right? Mm-hmm. And he's back in his cabin again. He's even worse now. He's about ready to die from these symptoms he has from being separated. So he realizes if he doesn't do something, he is going to die. And he decides he's going to accept Protos's offer to meld with the machine. He's like, it can't be that bad. So he travels to Protos's lair, and that lair is a good word. And he says, hey, you want to do the ritual? Let's do the ritual. Again, he's kind of naive. He has no idea what he is in for. And, he starts, as he's walking towards wherever Protoss has taken him, there's a guy that's sent to take him to this place, kind of an adept or something of the new Mechanicus. He starts hearing brass bells, mm-hmm. And you're going, okay, wait a minute. Corn, brass bells. Yep. We can, and the servant even says, you're being called by Korn. That's what that is. Don't worry about it. So he gets into an octagonal room. There we go, 8. And he's met by his own equerry, this guy named Kasim, who was kind of like his servant, right? But this guy is like way up in the hierarchy of the new Mechanicus. And Hatek had no idea.
Yep.
But this guy is basically telling him what to do now, which is crazy. And they paint him with, red glyphs. Kasim takes him to a huge, giant chamber, mm-hmm. Which has, strangely enough, 8 warlord titans, including, we know who, Nuncio Dolores. And they put posts in between the warlord's legs, and they chain him to the posts. This intricate ritual, there's blood sacrifice, Protoss is there, the acolytes are there, and a super intense pain keeps becoming, more and more intense. And all of a sudden he's just like screaming, and he realizes that his Titan is screaming with him. But I thought it was really cool as the reader, Jonathan Keeble is doing this. He was making this demon voice.
Yeah.
And it was
really cool.
He doesn't understand still what's happening, but we all know what's happening here.
Right.
And it was it was horrific actually to read about this.
Two things that stood out to me with this scene was, him realizing like, oh, I have a connection to my Titan that it doesn't use any technology. Like, we're just bonded, which is like different level.
Yes.
But also, you had mentioned that it was his servant who met him at the door, and it turns out his servant was a high-end priest in this new cult or whatever, or at least a local representative. I don't know.
Yeah.
But one thing that made me think of is kind of how the warrior lodges were this like secret secondary thing where rank didn't matter. It's like Hatek stumbled into that and was greeted by his subordinate. And I thought that was an interesting idea of like, okay, so the Mechanicum is now, or the new Mechanicum is now fully integrating itself into the Titans because they're merging those things rather than Titans being subservient. And it was just an interesting, like, oh, it kind of parallels the other dynamics that the Astartes have. I like that.
Especially, like you said, with the warrior lodges.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And then we come to the part of the story where Mahanavi, she's awakened again inside her tank. Sanguinius has actually been there for about a month or so, and he's decided that he wants to retake this primary hive on Beta Garmon 2. He thinks this is the best way to stabilize the situation. There's a lot of discussion, and Mahanavi has decided to commit the bulk of the Loyalist Titans to the assault on the hive, but she's going to send some of them out to defensive duties. And one of the places where these defensive duties take some of her Titans are Escher's second mandible is going to defend this huge, this is on another planet. It is, I think it's Beta Garmon 3. There's this huge giant astro telepathica temple thing. And it just, like, it's like a needle that just goes way up thousands of feet into the air. But they're going to defend this thing, quote, defend, right, with one maniple of mostly warhounds. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay, let's see how that works out. And then there, of course, there's this, description of the event when they all come to the surface of the planet, and it was really cool. Again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Titans landing. And then this, to me, this was my favorite part of the book, honestly. So we switch over now, and we're in a Stormbird. And the back open ramp is open. And our man Sanguinius is standing there in an open ramp looking down at what's going on.
Yeah, dude, cut to Freebird, like the solo playing in the background. This whole scene was amazing.
It's insane. And so he's watching Legios Solaria march. And this was really cool, this inner conversation Sanguinius was kind of having about how it was just such a waste. This whole thing was a waste, committing so many god machines that they could have used back on Terra. He understands the value of, unity and those kind of things, but his Raldoron is a main character in the Blood Angels, by the way. He's very prominent in the Siege of Terra. He actually becomes the first chapter master after the siege of Terra is done, in the post time. But he's talking to him, and he talks about there's some very uncomfortable truths he talks about regarding the Emperor, and there's almost this resentment, but he's expressing this to someone obviously he trusts. But it was really refreshing to have somebody who's as loyal and loved as Sanguinius having these very, very honest conversations that it really helps you understand how intelligent and compassionate and understanding this guy is.
Yeah.
And it was just so cool to listen to that part of the story.
I agree. And that's why I brought up earlier that he had already faced his demons, because like he's having these, it's from a place of empathy of like, I get why you turned. He almost did himself. Like it's a mad universe. We were all lied to. But he's torn because he's like, but this is not the answer. Like, this isn't what we do with that. And having to defend a problematic, I'll say, empire with the Emperor, because he does have stuff to answer to.
Yes.
But at the same time, be fully committed enough to be like, Horus can't be in charge. This is something else. Like,
Yes.
there's
This is not the answer. Yeah.
Yep, this guy's bloated and
Terrific.
dead. This guy's got horns growing out of him. Like,
It's just bad. So that was really fun. And then all of a sudden he looks down and he sees two Imperator class Titans. And they're both traitor god machines. And he's like, that one needs to die. And Ralderon's going, don't do it. Don't do it. And he turns around facing backwards out the ramp. And he falls backwards out of the ramp.
yeah, man.
His wings spread out and he dives right towards this thing and going, oh, this is so freaking awesome.
It is the Rio de Janeiro Jesus statue just like flopping out the back of the jet.
Exactly. So yeah, he you know, his there's a whole little story about his descent, and it's just epic. You know, the danger of void shields. Like something has to happen to those void shields, because if you hit the void shields moving quickly like that, you may just disappear into the warp if you don't do it right. So there's a thing where the timing of some attacks that go on, it knocks out the void shields so he can make it through. And then Ralderon's like, okay, boys, we got to go. if Sanguinius is going, we got to go. So they all dive out. So you can imagine like another 20 or 30 Space Marines jumping out of the back of this thing, following the Primarch. And once he gets there to the Titan, just you can imagine how bad it's going for the people there. And you mentioned this earlier, he starts continuously for like the next 5 chapters just screaming, I do not die here today. And he keeps saying that to himself and screaming it, you know? It doesn't matter what happens. Somebody could like almost cut his hand off or his head off, and he's like, I do not die here today.
I'm going to make my predestination your problem.
And the assault, he looks, he goes, okay, we need to kill the head of this thing. It's too big. So they plant melta chargers. Boom. They basically decapitate this Imperator class Titan. And it was another awesome scene in the book. Mm-hmm. With the Blood Angels and Sanguinius doing his thing, and just very, very cool. So then we get to Escher. As we said, she's on Beta Garmon 3, along with a few strays that were added to her maniple. And they're on a post at a mountainous area guarding this big telepathic cathedral. And she finished a communication with this really contemptuous guy who is kind of the commander of the forces. And she's requested reinforcements because she thinks that the War Master is going to try to destroy the cathedra. And this guy is like, no, we don't have any indication that the War Master's there or that his forces are there. No, sorry. It was just like, it was so bizarre. This guy was just totally, completely clueless, had no idea what goes on. And she disagrees, and he refuses her request. And he thinks the traitor forces are going to try to take the primary hive world. So that's where they're going to be. He also states that Horus has committed all of his Legio forces. There are none left to threaten the cathedral, which means, you know, as a reader, that he is going to threaten the cathedral.
Yes.
It's exactly what's going to happen, right? We go back to the assault on this city, and it's kind of cool because Mohanavai has this thing called a Myrmidon, which is with her, which is a formation of 2 warlords and a Reaver Titan, and they're kind of like her bodyguards.
Yeah,
and they get attacked by 15 knights, basically. And again, another cool, awesome scene. They're also, in addition to these little knights, there's 3 traitor warlords that are waiting in ambush. Mm-hmm. But of course, this is the Great Mother. She sees what's going on, and basically she smashes through this like 100-foot wall of debris and knocks out these traitor warlords, which is so cool. Just the Imperial Hunters at their best, man. It was
Yeah.
just a great scene of her doing what she did for hundreds of years, you know.
It was a 140-year-old woman who, like, if you're playing the game, imagine she just like goes directly through a piece of terrain like she could fly, and then takes out the entire back half of the army. It's pretty cool.
I mean, she took out 15 knights and 3 warlords, and it only cost her a reaver.
Yeah,
that's how good she is, right?
That's the art of the deal.
Exactly, exactly, man. Oh, it's so good. So now we go again. I know listeners, we're going back and forth, but this is the way the book is. It just moves all over the place. We're back with Hatek, and he's with 7 of his chaotic, quote, brothers now, who've all are in these weird, screaming, roaring, organic god machines. They're basically demonic vessels is what they are. And of course, Hatek is having a great time. You know, blood for the blood god.
Yep.
Whatever else. Very creepy, very over the top. There's all these other things going on. It was just pretty gross, honestly. But they are who they are. I mean, it's you know what this is. This is basically like Khorne berserkers in Titan form is what this is.
Exactly.
And they broke through the primary defensive wall, no trouble at all. They're moving up a main access road to the main complex, and all of a sudden, the primary guns start to fire at them. There's another warlord that shows up because there's a legio called Astra that's trying to fight them off, and he starts seeing visions of all kinds of weird things. He sees these weird bloody tentacles and bloody pulp all through the cockpit of his Titan, but you realize they're only visions still, not quite reality yet. And he kills this thing, and then usually there's a servitor. This again was great voice acting by Jonathan Keeble. Usually whenever previously in the story he killed something, it would be like engine kill, skull for the skull throne or whatever. This is like engine kill. It was this demonic voice that he makes instead of, so there's no more servitor. There's this deep demonic voice. And he screams blood for the blood god, you know?
Yeah.
And they're all moving forward, and all of a sudden, and this is the big reveal here, Legio Mortis, the entire Legio Mortis, the most dreaded traitor Titan Legion in the entire Horus Heresy, starts coming out through the mist. So, sorry, buddy, but you were totally wrong. In fact, not only does he have enough Titans, he has enough to probably destroy the whole planet here.
Extra, yeah.
Legio Mortis, man. Just even reading that or listening to it was going, it's like scary. When you think who these guys are.
Yes. So it was basically, they did a feint then to get Mother's forces like directed somewhere else. Yeah. So this is the real fist. Like,
yep.
bearing right down on our heir to be.
Yes. And now we flash back to Beta Garmon 2. And Ascalon, who is the head of Sanguinius's sanguinary guard, his bodyguard and stuff, they were sent into this city, it's like a fortress. It's called the Anvil. That's part of this city that they're assaulting. And they're going in to try to take the shields down. And they notice that it's kind of weird. Like they're fighting through this, and they realize that the quality of the defenders is so poor. Like, this is a really critical target, and like there's nobody here defending it. And he all of a sudden realized that the energy shields that had been holding the energy in check for the generators, they've been rigged to detonate. So it's going to be basically a city-sized explosion that's going to go off. This whole neocon city is a trap, basically. And on the exterior walls, the Loyalist forces, they're making their 5th attempt to breach the defenses. So Mahana Myrmidon is only a single warlord now. She's lost another warlord. And she's joined by like half a dozen other Titans. The casualties on both sides have been just catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to see in a little bit how bad it was. But you can just imagine the landscape littered with Titans.
Absolutely.
How horrible that would be. So just as she's about to lead the final assault, they breach the wall. All of a sudden, this warning comes over the Vox. It says, "Run, run." And the entire force turns. Every god machine is moving away, but it's not enough. This explosion was like planet shattering.
Mm-hmm.
This massive wave of just gigantic pieces of debris, this pressure wave. Even Luxor on Victoria, it falls over, it roll. I can't imagine. You know, I can imagine a lot of things in this story. I can't imagine a god machine that size just literally tumbling, right? When he was describing that. And by the time it finishes rolling, the Great Mother's dying because her amniotic tank is cracked and it's starting to, leak life-sustaining fluids. And so you're going, okay, well, so much for that plan. But so now we go back. So that's done. That's all finished. And not only were the possessed Titans attacking the Cathedra now, but Legio Mortis. And, of course, because that wasn't enough, the Sons of Horus.
Yeah, my guys.
Actually, drop pod assault. And there's Escher and her Maniple Plus. They were trying to use hit and run attacks. Very interesting, very cool description. But there's just too many of them. And she and Jahan, her close friend, were the only ones who were left. And suddenly she runs into, guess who? Her favorite buddy in the world, Hatek.
Yeah.
And his demonic Titan. They engage one another. There's this really cool battle going on. Jahani just kind of disappears. She doesn't know what happened to her. And as they fight, the fight that they have, Escher and Hatek, comes to an end. Hatek's ready to take a killing shot, and Jahani reappears and charges into Nuncio Dolores. They both fall over this huge cliff into the darkness. Mm-hmm. So both Hatek and Jahani are no more? ? Mm-hmm. Right? So what about this next part where...
Yeah, so changing perspectives again. Meanwhile, the cathedral that we're talking about that they were defending is just annihilated. I mean, there was never any real hope of anything. It was pretty minuscule anyway. But Escher and her crew were trying to flee. Domini ex Venari fell over and tumbled downhill. And Escher had a vision of Horus surveying the site of his most recent victory. But as he stood, she noticed something and saw an open wound on his side. And so essentially, she's having visions of what we now know is also happening, which is Russ attacking Horus on his ship. Mm-hmm. And let's see, as far as this is where Horus falls in this vision, and it's a little unclear as to whether or not he's going to survive, because we didn't know that in that story either. Mm-hmm. And essentially, at this point, a strong light hits Escher's eyes, and Apani Luce, Escher's daughter, was standing over her. And basically, they're pulling her out of the wreckage of all of this stuff. Everyone's just trying to pull the last things that they can together. And essentially, Escher says to her, it's okay. Horus is dead. We're saved. It's all going to be good. And there's this kind of, we know, temporary hope.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, essentially the battle ends with just all these Titans are getting trashed, right? And things weren't resolved with Hatek. It was just he disappeared. And so, yeah.
And so we have Sanguinius now, who's looking over the wreckage of this city-sized explosion.
Yeah.
And again, imagine instead of rocks and dirt and whatever else, the ground is literally covered for miles with God Machine leftovers. And the Admech is coming in, and they're starting to salvage. The Loyalist forces are basically, you know, after a battle, you look for the other guys on the other side, and you're just doing headshots to try to kill anybody who's still alive, right? And I thought it was really interesting that this guy Haley used this quote in his book. So Sanguinius says, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," which we know is an Oppenheimer quote from when
Yes.
you know the atomic bomb was created. So I thought that was really cool how he incorporated that and just that level of destruction and devastation. Again, this is another part of the book that is just fascinating because he's very bitter and very cynical about how pointless all of this was.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't necessary. And he's almost, I don't know, he's almost like resigned. You know, not that he gave up, but it just broke him almost to see this hopelessness that there was looking out over him.
He quoted Oppenheimer, but it made his tenor made me think of it's actually a quote from World War I, but it was regarding like just stuff got out of control. Like he's just ruminating on the fact that like he has a very reasonable perspective, but at a certain point this all just spun so far out of hand. Like I said, like it starts with a disagreement and reasonable things about the Emperor lying, and then it just spiraled into this, and then like I don't know, events passing largely beyond our control was just an idea that was brought up quite a bit.
Yes. So really the close of this is that Legio Solari has just suffered massive depletion.
Oh, yes.
In terms of their crews, their princeps, everybody. So we see Apani Luce, who is Escher's daughter, is walking through the last Titan transporter that survived. And she sees that they actually recovered the Great Mother's Titan. And they're salvaging it. And they see that her grandmother's amniotic tank is intact. So she lived. She didn't quite die. Escher is still in a coma. And you just see the inside of the ship is just saturated in misery just because of all the losses. And the Great Mother finally speaks, even though she's about to go. And she says, you know, the gene stocks, they're just exhausted.
Yep.
And when the Admech returns to Procon the next time, we're going to have to begin refilling the ranks of the Legio with men. We just don't have any more women that can be part of the Legio. So now it's going to be a normal type of
integrated, Legion.
Yeah, integrated unit, as most Titans are in other parts of the stories. But kind of ironic how that ended up happening. And you know, she just says to the survivors, take the best of what there is, take it into the next generation, you know, and basically what's going to happen is she's going to become one with the machine. Her physical body is going to die, and she's going to be kind of subsumed into the God machine, her machine, and somebody else will take her place, whoever that is. Back on Beta Garmon 3, the new Mechanicum is doing the same thing. They're conducting salvage operations, although they didn't have nearly as much to clean up as the Loyalists did. But there's a little bit of a difference. Remember, there were 8 God machines that were possessed, basically. Yes. And Protoss was just so obsessed with recovering all of them, obviously to bring them back to serve Khorne. 4 were found. But they couldn't salvage them at all. The 5th was usable, but it needed a new host. Oh, lovely for someone. And a 6th was found, and Hatek was inside. But this is the really cool part. Well, I think it's cool because he's such a jerk. So the Titan, he looked, and the Titan was moving itself. It was raising itself. And Hatek realized when he woke up, he was in a cage of bone. Literally.
Yeah.
There are veined membranes running everywhere. There's thick liquid oozing all over the Princeps compartment. The displays had flesh on the screens. The armor plates were starting to transform. They were like melted wax, right? And they were forming like cornate symbols on the surface of the Titan. The volcano cannon actually formed a mouth. And Hatek is trapped in this cage, and when he starts trying to get himself out, these needles like push into him. They pin him into like this eternal agony. His MIU cable actually becomes this tubular organ that's sucking on his brain, right? And he just screams. And it was like such a great ending for that jerk. Oh
yeah, man.
God. It was so cool.
I super appreciated that as the final scene for his fate of like, what is it like for the furthest chaos side of Titans? I mean, maybe there's 40K books about that, but like his starting as like this nice, clean, orderly, I don't care about any of my crew, and then ending with him like in a gore pit is pretty great.
It was so great. And then the ending, the very, very ending is Malkador's back in his little special garden on Terra, and he gets a message, and it's a very simple message. He just says Horus is coming.
Yep. And that concludes the book here, and I have some final thoughts here.
Yes.
This made me want to pick up the campaign book for the game Horus Heresy so much. There is a Beta Garmon book, which I have not read yet. I do want to do a series on it on my channel. But because this is just one story, right? This is one Legios perspective. We mentioned a few others, but
yes.
Around this, like, yeah, this story wraps up with, our Solaria Coven going away to resupply, but then a whole new story is beginning where Horus is like actively about to march on Terra. So I thought it was a great little handoff back to the other narratives regarding the Space Marines.
Yes.
I thought that was really clever, and it makes me want to learn more about the system, the story, all of that. What happened? How'd they get away? Like all that kind of stuff.
Yes. And we know what happens afterwards with Horus because we talked about Slaves to Darkness.
Yep.
So that is before he ends up actually physically heading towards Terra. There is still kind of an interlude, and that's what that book is. It's transition to the first book in Siege of Terra. Is because that would be the next story.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that wrapped up, what did you think of Titandeath?
Again, we talked earlier. I had mixed feelings about it just because of the pacing.
Yeah.
It was a little tough to listen to, but overall, I thought there were just some brilliant scenes that gave you a feel for what Titan combat was like. It gave us a really different perspective on Sanguinius as a Primarch and really got personal with him.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the stories of these characters. The formation of Legios Solara I thought was a great story. And it was great because it made sense. It wasn't just like out of nowhere it came up. It absolutely made sense in terms of the lore and what you would have expected to happen. And it made it more powerful that it was what it was, that its uniqueness. And I enjoyed that quite a bit as well. Overall, it was a great story. It was a great transition, you mentioned earlier, to this next part of the Heresy, which is the siege.
Yeah.
But
I have the same criticism regarding the pacing. It felt like there was maybe like one or two battles we could have cut out or maybe refocused some other scenes on and kind of condensed it or kept the pacing going a little bit better. But all that being said, I feel like if you are someone who really loves knights, and 30K, 40K, it doesn't really matter. I'm not that person, but if you are, this is an incredible book because it does go through the arduous, like, what is it like when your brain is in an amniotic tank and has to wake up to a user interface system? You were joking about like a whole chapter about waking up a Titan. we sit there with Mahana Vai as she wakes up, process by process, and and we get to see how the different teams work together when they're all plugged in, how their senses change from being in the machine to being in person. Like, if you love Titans, it's an incredible book for getting the details like that. For everybody else, it's like, oh my god, please move. Let's move along. Okay, so he started the car. I understand he started the car. Yeah. But I thought overall it was a fantastic story. I really love the uniqueness that they gave, like you said, the background of Solaria. And an interesting note was just how most stories don't end on a note of embracing a willingness to change and adapt. And this one did. I was like, wow, that actually makes them stand out immensely. And it pairs well with that nice human moment she had earlier when it was the 3 generations in a room.
Mm-hmm.
And the only criticism story-wise I have is that they pointed out that the youngest was kind of like fighty, just like her dad was, kind of a thing, without knowing who her dad was. Yes. Yeah. And my thought was, like, they never really addressed the fact that she needs to temper that anger. I mean, there was a moment where she got put in her place, but I felt like it wasn't really a character development.
Sure.
But I mean, that's a minor note. We didn't need any more scenes in the book, so I feel like I'll let that one go. I'll let that one go. So, you and I talked about what we're going to be reading next, and you had a good idea. These longer books, they're very interesting, but they are exhausting. And so we're going to treat ourselves to a little something, because in addition to just the Horus Heresy series, there's also the Primarch series, which is just books that really spotlight a particular Primarch. And they're shorter stories, but they're really just driven to give a character synopsis. And so we're going to do Leman Russ, the Great Wolf.
Yes.
By Chris Raitt, I believe. And I'm excited. Russ is one of those characters that, like, I don't want to play Space Wolves as an army. I have yet to read anything that makes me want to start an army of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I like him as a character. And I think there's a lot more depth there that meets the eye with the nature of his duty. So I'm excited to get into this.
Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Cool.
Anything else you want to add here at the end?
I don't think so, man. I think that's about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, dude. You and I are going to have some fun here soon. Right after this goes live, you and I are going to be playing at Holy Havoc, which is an Age of Sigmar event together.
Yes.
I am so excited. And so anyway, if you want to hear more about that, you can talk to me or chat with me on YouTube at 2+ Stuff, or Dan over at Cubic Shenanigans. We're double teaming the Flesh Eater Courts. So I got to panic and put together my Hero of Havoc.
I am going to use, I sent you a picture, I'm going to use my Wargog Prophet that I painted years ago.
Nice.
He's going to be my hero. I was trying to go through models I already had, and I had a couple others I considered, and I realized this thing was there. I'm going, man, I need to dust this off and do a little touch up, but this is just perfect for Havoc.
Yeah, absolutely. So look forward to that. Thank you so much for your time, Dan. I love doing this stuff with you.
Thank you for having me on board, man.
And anyone who has questions or suggestions for our next book, leave them in the comments, either on the podcast service or YouTube here on 2+ Stuff, and we'll get to them. With all that out of the way, thank you so much for listening, and may the Emperor protect.